One side of me says, I'd like to talk to her, date her. The other side of me says, I wonder what her head would look like on a stick. The man who spoke these words did so calmly, as if discussing the weather. This chilling duality sums up the enigma of Edmund Kemper, a friendly giant on the surface and a calculating predator underneath. At 6 feet 9 inches tall with gentle manners, Kemper could disarm anyone's suspicions. He drank beers with the cops hunting for a serial killer, all while a severed head quietly decayed in his mother's garden. Welcome to Timeless Mysteries. Please like and subscribe. Today, we plunge into the psyche of a murderer who was more parts monster than man. In the annals of true crime, few stories are as gripping as this one. Edmund Emil Kemper III entered the world on December 18, 1948 in sunny Burbank, California. But his childhood was anything but sunny. His parents' marriage crumbled when Ed was young, and he ended up in the care of his mother, Clarnell, a woman whose love was as cold and cruel as the concrete basement where she forced her son to sleep at night. Down in that shadowy basement with the smell of damp earth and moldy walls for company, young Ed's imagination began to twist into macabre shapes. Clarnell was abusive and domineering, regularly mocking Ed's large size and belittling him as a real weirdo. She hammered into him that no woman would ever love him, that he was destined to be a failure. In the dark, isolated quarters beneath that house, those words echoed and festered. Little Ed started to hate, and in the suffocating loneliness, his hate had room to grow. Signs of Kemper's troubled mind emerged early and violently. He took to decapitating his sister's dolls for fun, relishing that little pop sound as the plastic heads came off. He invented a disturbing make-believe game called Gas Chamber, in which he had his sisters blindfold him and lead him to a chair. There, he would theatrically writhe in agony, faking death as if executed. By age 10, he had moved from make-believe to animal cruelty. That year, he buried the cat alive and listened for its muffled cries beneath the dirt. Later, he dug it up, cut off its head, and mounted it on a spike. At 13, he slaughtered another of the family cats with a knife. These acts gave him a dark thrill, a first taste of power he could wield over life and death. In his fantasies, he even imagined doing the same to the person he hated the most, his mother. Childhood diary pages and memories from this same time would later reveal a boy already consumed by violent ideation, dreaming of silencing the caustic voice that berated him daily for his entire life. Clarnell, increasingly afraid of her towering teenage son and the rage flickering behind his eyes, sent Ed to live with his father for a time. But Ed's father had moved on with a new family and didn't want the troubled teen. In 1964, at age 15, Kemper was packed off to North Fork, California, to live with his paternal grandparents on a remote farm. If Clarnell was harsh, Ed's grandmother, Maud, was equally overbearing, and now there were guns in the house. Ed was already proficient with firearms, but his grandparents sensed his darkness and they took away his rifle after he mercilessly shot several birds. On the surface, Ed obeyed, but inside, his resentment deepened. Cut off from society, simmering with anger, he began to see his grandmother as another version of Clarnell, someone who sought to control and ridicule him. And on August 27, 1964, Edmund reached a breaking point. That day, an argument in the farmhouse kitchen turned fatal. In a sudden eruption of long brewing rage, 15-year-old Ed grabbed a rifle and shot his grandmother Maud in the head. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the quiet rural afternoon. His grandmother's blood pooled on the linoleum floor as Ed stood over her body. The reality of what he'd done sinking in. Yet when his 72-year-old grandfather returned home, Ed's wrath hadn't cooled. He met the old man in the driveway and shot him dead by his car. As casually as one would shoot a possum digging through your trash, the carnage was shockingly complete. The beloved grandma and grandpa slain by their own grandson.
Saying I'd wanted to kill my mother since I was 8 years old, and I'm not proud of that. It started with surrogates at a non-human level. Physical objects, my possessions, other people's, destruction of things that are cared about, and then destruction of things that are living on a lower level, small animals, insects, animals, and then finally people.
After the smoke cleared, Ed phoned his mother back in Montana, confessing in a flat, affectless tone that he had hurt his grandparents. Clarnell told him to call the police, and Ed did, then sat quietly and waited for authorities next to the two cooling bodies. When asked later why he did it, Ed's answer was as cold as it was telling. He wanted to see what it felt like. He also claimed a twisted sort of mercy in killing his grandfather, that he didn't want the old man to find his wife dead, so it was better to kill him too. The contradictions in his explanation, brutal experiment one moment, warped kindness the next, provide the first glimpse of the convoluted workings of Edmund Kemper's mind. Kemper was 15, too young for adult prison. So after his arrest, he was handed over to the California Youth Authority and eventually sent to a Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for the criminally insane. The psychiatrists there examined this unusual boy killer. They found the young man had a very high IQ paired with a laundry list of psychosis. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, though some staff doubted that was accurate. Ed, for his part, learned exactly what the doctors wanted to hear. Even as he was psychologically evaluated, he was studying their methods, probing their weaknesses, making his own evaluations. Over the 5 years of his incarceration, the teenager transformed into a model patient, charming the staff with good behavior and insight into his own issues. In interviews, he was cooperative and articulate, as if genuinely remorseful and rehabilitated. In reality, Ed was honing his manipulative skills. He later admitted that he learned a lot from the psychologists, not what they intended to teach him, of course, but he learned how to fool them, and fool them he did. In 1969, Edmund Kemper won his release from Atascadero at age 21, having convinced doctors he was no longer a threat. Before he left prison, the psychiatrist actually recommended that he not live with his mother. They had a glimmer of how toxic that relationship was, but Ed had other plans. He moved in with Clarnell in Santa Cruz, California, where she worked as an administrative assistant at the University of California, Santa Cruz. The stage was now set. The Co-Ed Killer had entered the community he would later terrorize, wearing the mask of a temperate giant even as his darkest impulses were swirling within. Santa Cruz in the early 1970s was a paradoxical place, sunlit beaches and redwood forests on one hand, and a growing sense of dread on the other. Unbeknownst to the residents, multiple serial killers were stalking the area at the same time, earning the region the ominous nickname, Murder Capital of the World. Into this environment stepped Ed Kemper, outwardly just an awkward young man trying to start fresh. He enrolled in college, hoping to study law enforcement, and even applied to become a state trooper. He was rejected for a rather ironic reason. At 6 foot 9 inches and nearly 300 pounds, Ed was deemed too large to be a cop. The rejection stung. But it didn't keep Ed away from the police. In fact, it drove him to insinuate himself even more into their world. He hung around a popular cop bar in town, the Jury Room, where off-duty officers would gather for beers and banter. There, his imposing size and affable nature earned him the nickname Big Ed. He listened eagerly to the officers' stories, laughed at their jokes, and even befriended a few. One officer gave Big Ed a spare police training badge and a set of handcuffs, a gesture of camaraderie that secretly thrilled Kemper. Another cop let him borrow a service revolver for target practice. Ed also bought himself a used car that looked a lot like a police cruiser, complete with a radio antenna, and later a plastic UC Santa Cruz parking sticker that he got from his mother. Clarnell was working on campus, likely thought the parking permit would help her son get to his classes. Instead, it became a hunting permit of sorts, allowing him to access the very prey he was starting to stalk. To anyone observing in 1971, Ed Kemper was just a shy, slightly goofy young man living with his mom, nursing ambitions of joining the police force. He would often drive around town in his pseudo-cop car waving politely to acquaintances, but inside, Ed's dark urges were far from cured. They were merely biding their time. After a motorcycle accident that year left him with a settlement of $15,000, Kemper was out of work and restless. With that money, he bought a new car, a green 1969 Ford Galaxy, and he quietly outfitted it for murder. He lined the trunk with plastic bags, obtained knives, a gun, and those handcuffs his police buddy had given him. He even kept tools like blankets and ropes, the kinds of things a person might need to secure a victim. At night, he would sit in that car, the interior smelling of Armor All and steel, fantasizing about the women he saw on the streets. Santa Cruz was full of young college girls and hippies hitchhiking from place to place. Thumbing rides was a normal part of life back then. To Ed, each outstretched thumb was an invitation. At first, he resisted his murderous impulses. He picked up hitchhikers, dozens by his own count, and let them go unharmed, savoring the sense of power in choosing not to kill. But with each ride, the line between fantasy and reality wore thinner. By the spring of 1972, Ed's urges had sharpened into a singular obsession. He knew the time had come to actually do it, to make his dark fantasies real. On May 7, 1972, Edmund Kemper's inner monster was unleashed. Driving along a freeway, he picked up two 18-year-old Fresno State College students, Marianne Pesky and Anita Lucchesa, who were hitchhiking to Stanford. The girls, chatting in the back seat of the big green Ford, had no idea that the polite, bespectacled man behind the wheel had been cruising for potential victims for months. He took them on a maze of back roads to confuse and disorient them as the afternoon light faded. Eventually, he turned down a secluded wooded area. It was there, among the whispering pines and the encroaching darkness, that Ed Kemper transformed fully into a predator. He pulled a knife and a gun and revealed his true self. Marianne and Anita were utterly helpless against the sheer size and surprise of Big Ed. Kemper handcuffed and immobilized the girls. In a frenzy of violence, he stabbed and strangled them one by one. The scent of blood filled the car's interior, mingling with the piney night air and the girls' last terrified breaths. With the two young girls dead, their bodies slumped in his car, Kemper coolly drove back to his apartment, while somehow avoiding drawing attention. He carried the corpses inside like bundles of laundry. Over the next few hours, behind closed doors, he indulged in every twisted curiosity he had. He carefully decapitated both women and dismembered their bodies. The small apartment became a butcher shop. Blood soaked into the cheap carpet. Kemper kept the heads for a few days, periodically engaging in gruesome necrophiliac acts with them. Acts too grotesque to detail, but which he would later freely admit as if discussing a normal hobby. Eventually, he packed the body parts into plastic bags and drove out into the dead of the night to dispose of them. On August 15, 1972, a female head was discovered by hikers near Santa Cruz, and later it was identified as Marianne Pesky. Anita Lucchesa's remains were never found. The community was horrified. A killer was stalking young women. But who? Over the next few months, Kemper lay low, stewing in the afterglow of his first kills and bickering constantly with his mother at home. Clarnell noticed her son staying out late and acting secretive, but she attributed it to normal 20-something behavior. By the fall, Ed's bloodlust surged up again. On September 14, 1972, he cruised the roads until he encountered 15-year-old Aiko Ku, a dance student who had hitchhiked after missing her bus. This time, Ed nearly botched the abduction. After coercing Aiko into his car, he somehow locked himself out, leaving the terrified girl trapped alone inside. But Kemper's smooth tongue saved him. Remarkably, he convinced Aiko to let him back in, promising he meant no harm. The innocent teenager actually reached over and unlocked the door for the towering stranger, a gesture of trust that cost her her life. Kemper choked Aiko unconscious and then finished her off by suffocation. He later mused with dark irony how close he came to getting caught that night. It was an intoxicating display of his manipulative power. With Aiko's body in the car, Ed stopped for a moment to catch his breath, even stopping at a bar for a beer as if nothing were out of the ordinary. Finally, he took the body home, committing acts of necrophilia and dismemberment once more, disposing of her remains that next morning. By now, Kemper had perfected his methods and felt invincible. The police were utterly stumped, in part because Ed was literally friends with them, gathering insider news. In January 1973, he decided to up the ante. He picked up 18-year-old Cindy Shaw, a college student home for the winter break. He shot her in the head with a pistol, a quick execution-style murder that left his car interior splattered with blood. With his mother away at work, Ed brought Cindy's body to Clarnell's house and carried the lifeless form up to his bedroom. Perhaps he greeted his mother's cat on the way in, suppressing a grin, knowing what lays hidden in this house. In the quiet of his room, Ed laid out the corpse on his bed. The floral scent of laundry detergent mixed with the raw iron smell of death. Methodically, he dismembered Cindy's body. He cut off her head and had sex with the corpse. In acts of defilement, he chillingly described later with clinical detachment. When he was done, he packed up the pieces in bags and dumped some into the Pacific Ocean. Over the next weeks, severed limbs washed ashore, sending waves of panic through Santa Cruz.
And then a month later, I'm up living with my grandparents in the mountains, and 10 months later, I murdered them.
But one part of Cindy's body Ed kept close, her severed head. In a grotesque act, Kemper buried it in his mother's backyard garden, right outside of Clarnell's bedroom window, face up, looking toward the house. Later, he would quip that he did it because his mother always wanted people to look up to her. That night, as Ed looked out the window at the freshly turned soil, the garden was eerily still. He had literally sown his crimes at his mother's doorstep, yet Clarnell noticed nothing amiss. Kemper's daring was at its peak. By February 1973, authorities announced a warning not to hitchhike, but if it was necessary, a safe ride could be identified by a college parking sticker. Ed was no longer content with one victim at a time. On the evening of February 5th, 1973, he used that UC Santa Cruz sticker that his mother gave him to lure two new victims into his car. 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe and 20-year-old Allison Liu. They gladly accepted a ride from this friendly-looking guy with his university sticker. Little did they know that they were about to die. Ed shot them shortly after getting in his car. With his .22 caliber pistol, the shots were muffled by the everyday campus life bustle. Amazingly, he passed a security checkpoint on the way out of campus. The guard, unaware that the two co-eds were already dead in the back seat, that night, he repeated his usual routine: decapitation, dismemberment, disposing of the remains. Body parts of Rosalind and Allison were found scattered across Central California. By then, the media called him the Co-Ed Killer. No one suspected the hulking young man who drank with police at the jury room. Ed was elated by his invisibility. In one later interview, he boasted how he nearly courted discovery, yet remained unseen. The only person who truly suspected Ed might be dangerous was perhaps Clarnell, his mother. Mother and son continued to clash daily. And by that spring, Ed's bloodlust and lifelong rage were about to converge on one final horrific crescendo. It was Good Friday, April 20th, 1973. While many reflected on sacrifice and redemption, in the Kemper household, a very different ritual was unfolding. That night, 52-year-old Clarnell Strandberg returned home from a party, likely a bit drunk and still fuming from an argument. Ed, now 24, was lying in wait. According to his account, she looked up from a book and snarled, "I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." "No, good night," he replied softly, then backed out of the room. But he had no intention of letting it in there. In the pre-dawn hours, once Clarnell was asleep, Ed crept back in with a claw hammer and a knife. He raised the hammer and brought it down with all of his strength. The first blow crushed her skull with a sickening thump. Before she could fully comprehend, Ed slit her throat, silencing her forever in a gush of blood. But Ed Kemper was not done. He decapitated Clarnell's corpse and propped her severed head on a shelf and began screaming at it, unleashing years of pent-up vitriol. He grabbed his darts and used her head as a dartboard. He cut out her tongue and her larynx, the organs that had voiced all of her abuse, and put them in the garbage disposal. But the garbage disposal couldn't handle the tough tissues and spat them back out into the sink, which Ed found darkly amusing. After this orgy of violence, an eerie calm settled on Kemper. There, he reportedly said, "Now you don't have to yell at me anymore, Mom." Oddly, his next move was almost compassionate in a twisted way. He called his mother's best friend, Sally Hallett, inviting her over. He killed Sally quickly upon her arrival, presumably to spare her from discovering what he had done to Clarnell, or to simply tie up loose ends. He then left a misleading note for the police claiming these murders were a mercy, and he fled. After days of driving, he reached Pueblo, Colorado. The radio hadn't reported the murders yet, no roadblocks, nothing. But soon Kemper did the unexpected. On April 23, 1973, he found a phone booth and called the Santa Cruz Police Department, confessing he was the Co-Ed Killer. At first, they thought it was a prank, Big Ed, their affable friend, a serial killer. It didn't make sense. But Edmund Kemper insisted, and then he asked for an officer that he knew personally. When they realized he was serious, police found Clarnell's body exactly as Kemper had described. Ed waited calmly in Colorado for them to pick him up. In October of 1973, Edmund Kemper was put on trial in Santa Cruz for 8 counts of first-degree murder. He'd already been tried for his grandparents' murder as a juvenile, but now the world saw the full-grown killer. The trial drew intense media attention. People couldn't reconcile his mild manners with his ghastly crimes. Kemper pleaded insanity, but his lucid, detailed confessions undermined that claim. The jury found him sane and guilty on all counts. When asked his preferred punishment, Kemper said that he believed he deserved to be tortured to death, but California had suspended the death penalty. So in November of 1973, he received 8 life sentences. At 25 years old, he was sent to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, where he remains to this day. In prison, he became a perfect inmate, participated in psychiatric studies, and even helped pioneer criminal profiling by talking extensively with FBI agents. John Douglas and Robert Ressler, the FBI's behavioral science pioneers, interviewed Kemper. Douglas noticed Kemper was friendly, open, and intelligent, but was he really an anomaly? Kemper has often said he's happy in prison and should never be released, repeatedly waiving parole. He also recorded countless audiobooks for the blind, ironically giving a voice to a population even as he once silenced his victims. Over the years, Kemper has crafted the legend of the Co-Ed Killer, talking about his split personality, the gentle Ed versus the sadistic butcher. He remains a staple of true crime lore, both horrifying and fascinating investigators, psychologists, and the public at large. In many ways, we can see him as the living embodiment of the question, how can someone so normal on the outside be so monstrous within? Kemper himself put it best. I knew long before I started killing that I was going to be killing. It was something that would happen. He likened it to a path he couldn't leave. Yet he also claimed he gave himself chance after chance to stop by letting hitchhikers go. It's just one of the many contradictions in this complex figure, a monster who was both born and made, hiding in plain sight. While the ghosts of his victims and his mother's venom still echo in the silence, he is where he belongs, yet his story continues to haunt us. If Edmund Kemper's story gave you nightmares, just wait until you hear about Alex Murdaugh, a once powerful South Carolina attorney, now convicted of murdering his wife and son. He's appealing that conviction, even as revelations of financial crimes continue to surface. Get ready for the full, disturbing details in our next video. As always, stay kind, be vigilant, and always question the truth. I'll catch you in the next video.